So about 18 months ago, the Brokers Association of Ontario went out to its membership to try and re-establish the strategic direction of where we have to head in the next few years. And a clear message that we got out of that was that we had to focus on technology for our members. Part of that exercise was to retool our technology committee. So as many of you have worked with associations before, quite often for not-for-profits or volunteer organizations, you get quite a large number of warm bodies and seats. We needed to make sure that because of the advancements in technology and how quickly it's going, that we need to make sure we got our experts out of our membership to sit on our committee. So we retooled the committee early last year, and we have some of them here today with you. So the committee's made up of Rick Orr, who's here, Greg Kruk, Adam Mitchell, and they're all going to talk. I feel a bit out of place because I don't actually have a beard, but there you go. Maybe next time. I'll get the memo the next time, guys. Or maybe not, Rick, if you think something's going to happen to me next week, but who knows.
I was wondering where your bipper was.
Yeah, well, they get some more podcasts. Yeah. So from that, we've actually got a large number of other members. I'm not sure if there may be some of them in here today, but we've got Rick Dresner, many of you will know, Jamie Martin, Jeff Jones, Jeff Roy, Tim Wiley, Danish Youssef, and Tracy Boland that sit on our tech committee. We've been working very closely with the industry, and would like to tell you a little bit about where we see the data connectivity going in the industry today. So without further ado, I'm going to actually hand over to Rick, and I'll see if this is actually...
If you have questions as we go through this, we're happy to take them. We've got an hour, so we're going to present.
Trying to shave it down to 20 minutes.
20 minutes? 20 minutes, and then what are you doing after that?
We're going back for lunch number 2.
Lunch number 2. I just have a brief presentation for this part, if I can speak properly. I kind of get to do the why we're doing this and why now, and why is it IBAO. So, as Colin said, we formed the new technology committee a little while ago, and we were talking that we need better communication tools as an industry. There's no question, we all agree that. Our consumers want it. We want to deliver better information to our consumers. We have a really messy industry. Figuring out which button to push. There we go, the green one. We have a really messy industry. We've got BMSs trying to connect to companies. We've got companies trying to deliver information to third-party vendors. We've got brokers that want different information than each other. We've got consumers that would like different information. We all agree we need change, but we needed a catalyst. What was going to make this change actually happen? And along came our very good friends, the Liberal provincial government, and announced in their budget they were going to allow digital pink slips, which we're still waiting for, and they were going to mandate discounts on electronically delivered policies. Well, there's our catalyst. So we got talking about what our fears were and what we're going to start facing, and very quickly our fears came true. We had some companies decide that they wanted to own the communication and the relationship with the client. We had others that had been developing and sped up their development, and we had other companies that were talking about it, and instead of jumping into it, they came and spoke to us about it. So we had a real mix of reaction from different insurers, and to IBAO's credit, they've spent a lot of time working with all of the carriers, and we've kind of settled it all down. We all agree that we're not very good at sharing data with each other. We're going to use a different term, but you can use which one you like. We don't share data well. Part of that is some don't want to, and a lot of it is we can't do it it's not possible. There's no question that brokers need to own this relationship. Brokers need to have those communication tools. We can't have an insurance company owning the relationship that we have. We can't have an insurance company pushing that the client has to come to their portal to get their pink slip, to their portal to get their policy documents, to their portal to get claims information, to their portal to get to make a payment. All of that is what a broker's supposed to do. And in the world of today's technology, there's no reason we can't. There's no reason other than we're blocked by the technology within our own industry. So, in order to save that relationship, we've been working very hard on how to move it forward, which is what Greg's going to talk about. I did think yesterday when David Coletto was speaking on the millennials, he hit a couple of keynotes for our project. Millennials don't like insurance. really nobody likes insurance. So how do we engage them more? They want transparency and they want to be involved. So if we can actually deliver functionality to them in their hands, then they can start to get involved. They can start doing some quoting on their phones within our brokerages. They can get their claims data if they want on their phones. They can get their pink slip. That's gonna be the push to get them there. But the rest of it is how do we keep them engaged and keep them going back to that application. And I think David nailed that yesterday, is transparency and engagement. And the more data that we can share with each other, the more we can push out to the consumer and engage them. So we set a couple of guiding principles for the association as we do our technologies. It has to start and end within the BMS without broker portals on the company side. Consistent provisioning of data and functions across all the carriers. Real-time access to key policy and claims data across all lines of business, and elimination of reliance on the third-party integrators, which suddenly gives us the ability to serve our clients the way that we want to serve them. And all of this happening while we embrace CSIO data standards, because we do absolutely need some standards in the background. So where are we at today a little bit? Within the industry, we've got the IBAO Data Exchange Project, which 8 years later has delivered the Red River Mutual. We need something more than that. We need more of it coming quicker. We've got the TIC Data Exchange Project, which is trying to deliver claims data to between carriers and brokers, which is great, except it's one part of the solution. It's not the solution. And then just recently, we've got CSIO and their My Proof of Insurance, which again is a great basic first step. But just sending a pink slip and a policy document to somebody electronically isn't the solution we need as an industry to engage our clients. This is what we need to avoid. This is an image of API connections between only 11 insurers, the incumbent BMSs, and a few new players within the industry. In Ontario, we have 90 insurance companies. When you take a look at somebody, pick a BMS, Power Broker, Keel. If you're trying to build API connections individually for every market, to every BMS, to every third party, to every new entrant that's trying to get into the industry, we have a very messy situation and a problem that's going to completely stifle innovation. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg to tell you how we're going to fix that.
I'm going to pause after each slide and let you guys chime in because there's so much material. So with Rick starting out and then Adam at the end, they kind of put all the meat in the middle and gave it to me, but we'll work our way through it. Starting with what is an API. So if you Google API or you go on YouTube and you look at what is an API, you're going to get some very techie explanations. So to completely take this back to as simple as it gets, we'll say the API, and Rick just reminded me of this analogy. The API is like your waiter at the restaurant, taking your order, going to the kitchen, getting your food, and bringing it back to your table. So the waiter represents the API. So as you can see here on this slide, the policyholder or the broker, if the broker is the end user, can communicate directly to a policy admin system or a claim system, anything on the carrier's server, directly in real time, and it's true data back and forth. Good. So to get into a bit of how we can simplify the process as opposed to that messy slide there that Rick showed you a few minutes ago.
So one pause. Does everybody, now's the time to put up a hand. Does everybody from that last slide get a basic understanding of what we're talking about? Because this entire discussion is around APIs. So now is a good time to admit or ask or peel any questions.
Is that happening in real time?
Yeah, APIs are real time, so it's the language at which you're sending. I'm going to send you a text through an API protocol, and you will receive it and then send it back to me. So that's the only way they happen.
Which is why everybody's trying to build the API to get that real-time piece, and which is why it's getting so messy. If we can build one box in the middle and they have to just connect once, life becomes simple.
And part of the solution that's being proposed by other organizations, the reason that we don't think it completely fits with the Ontario marketplace is because Ontario is a unique marketplace in the fact that we deal with a ton of different markets, and a lot of the other provinces have a lot less choice. So, and some have very little choice. So it's a lot easier for them to integrate directly with the companies policy admin systems. But for us, we don't think that that would work, and it's going to cause that mess that you saw on the previous slides. So we do feel, though, that the CSIO XML language is ideal for the APIs. So if you see here, there's really two types of APIs, or two groupings of APIs. There's the data API, which is static data. That's policy inquiry. That's being able to look at what's sitting currently on your client file, or your client seeing directly onto their file what it consists of. But then the second grouping is the transactional APIs, which they go through and to the carrier's policy admin system or claim system, and then the data is changed and in real time back to the broker or third party vendor, so that we can see it once again in real time. So do you guys have anything you want to add on to that?
Does this slide make sense?
Yeah, you'll see the two groupings. The data APIs are essentially just being able to see detail on claims, your payment schedule, that kind of stuff, which we think, that's the simple stuff. The transactional APIs are where we want to get to, where we can then provide the broker model, but also allowing customers to have a client or a self-serve option, as well as brokers being able to make policy changes one and done in the BMS in real time.
So can you flip back 2 slides to the messy one? 3. So this one is each vendor, each third party, each carrier, all building one bridge to every single party that they want to integrate with. And then flip forward the 3 slides. This would be one set of rules, one central bridge for each path, and everybody's following the same path. So you can choose who comes in and out, but this will give a path to third parties to come into the market, competition, and all carriers and all brokers to compete equally, not on the data.
And they don't have to be on the same standards. So the companies dump in the best CSIO data they have. They build one set of APIs that go into the box in the middle, and then whoever's on the other end takes out what they need. It's not everything on equal level playing fields. Different companies use different data. Different BMSs want different data. It's you dump it all in and then you take it out what you need.
Yeah, so that's where our proposal and idea and the work that the tech committee and the IBAO have done over the last 18 months comes into play, because what we're proposing is a centralized hub to translate the data, so that it is the BMS is just going in once, grabbing the data, and they can convert it. It's already converted, and the company's putting it in there and it being converted so that it's a usable data source for the third party or the BMS vendors. The companies will connect to the translator versus connecting directly into the back end servers.
Ed's got the confused face.
Yeah, that's right. The purple box there, so who controls and owns that?
Oh, the next slide. We're going to get there.
Or insurance. Just send your checks payable to Rick or.
So good transition into why we want a broker-led hub. And not in order of the slide here, but we'll start with mass because it's the most important. So what we really want to do is to have maximum benefit to the brokers, there has to be critical mass. It's not going to help anybody running a brokerage or working in a brokerage if 3 of your 12 markets are adopting this and you still have 9 other workflows. We really do need critical mass, and we need to push for every carrier to work with us, at least on the feasibility study, so that we can see that this is possible and move forward with this. It's going to make companies' transaction times and savings substantial, the brokers' workflows and quote to bind times substantially less, as well as real-time claims information and everything we've already talked about. So the key is, and the number one reason is to get critical mass and to make it easier. So the time, this is now. So the timing on this slide, meaning when do we want this by, we need to start working on this now. If we keep going the way we are with companies moving to Guidewire and some companies not moving, and even the ones that have made the substantial investment to make the move to a Duck Creek or a Guidewire, they're still years off to be able to actually open up the APIs for brokers that can even use it or afford to create a program to use the APIs. So we think the time is now, so that we can, as these companies are working, we can start implementing the data immediately, even before they've moved completely over to a Guidewire or before they've got everything on the CSIO XML language, they can start working with this proposed accelerator or hub, if you want to call it, immediately. I believe that's right, Colin.
Do you want to bounce back?
Bounce back.
Yeah, bounce back a slide. So we all know there's a handful of companies that are currently working with Guidewire. We know there's a handful of companies that are currently starting to work with Duck Creek. Duck Creek's a fair bit behind where Guidewire, the project is. In order to get Guidewire to where it is today, it's taken a number of years. So what you'll end up happening, if we don't do something similar to this, you'll end up with a handful of companies that can interact with brokers real time. But if you've got 12 companies in your office, your ability to service consumers is based upon your lowest common denominator, not the 3 companies that you may have out of your 12 that can do it real time. You still have to do it 9 times manually. What we need to do is get critical mass to get everybody engaged with this, to try and ensure that as many companies as possible can deal in real time. Even if it's just for the basic inquiry information like billing of all things, which many people really struggle with. So on the right-hand side here, you'll see the different colors. You've got Guidewire, Duck Creek. These are the guys that are most likely to be able to move in this direction on a quick pace, which is fantastic. But the other guys, we have to catch up. So we've just used some examples here. So EMEA, some of the mutuals, some of the smaller companies.
And the next one's not a male-female carrier?
No, it's not, is it?
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a mainframe carrier as opposed to male-female. And, you know, we need to make sure that there's an even playing field for the area of our business that does not create a competitive edge, and that is the base data that we all use. On the left-hand side, we have to make sure that all of the vendors have access to this information and have the ability to create the connections. Now, I always pick on Keel because I know them pretty well, and many of them will know them. They're a relatively mid-sized team. Their ability to create hundreds of links to insurance companies. Now, bear in mind, I'm not sure if we've said this, but each company, if they have a different claim system to a different policy administration system, maybe even a different billing system, you need multiple APIs per company. Each one has to interface with the BMSs. So there's hundreds of these channels that will have to be built and maintained. For the brokers that are in the audience, I bet you're all on different versions of BMSs as well. You're never on the same one, and therefore the data transactions, again, would have to be translated. So in order for this to be meaningful, there has to be a centralized hub, and the best way it's been described to us by one of the insurance companies, it's like a clearing systems of the banks. The banks all subscribe to it, but they don't own it and they don't control it. But it creates the standardization in the marketplace so that we can all get on with life and money can move around freely around the economy.
Similar example for anybody who hasn't thought about any of these data standards would be Interact. As a successful launch of this, where competitors came together to collaborate and said this would be useful for all of us if all of our members could go to any store, any ATM, and use the card equally, and then we'll compete on the other pieces.
Great. So last week, Economical announced their Lyft platform, which is their Guidewire. Yeah. What's it? Oh, fine, sorry. Yeah. Which is Guidewire, and they claim that will allow the broker to start and finish in the BMS. Yeah. How is that different?
Well, I mean, it is, because a Guidewire is going to make things simpler. So as if you see on the right hand side here, we're still asking them, and I'll get to it in 2 slides, but we're still asking Duck Creek and Guidewire to provide a single language that we can, their APIs, so that we can have a single language translator in the middle, so that each of the BMSs on the left, which that list is growing, and there's ones I can think of already that aren't on that list, but that's growing. So we want to be able to have those BMS vendors and third-party vendors being able to go in and already pull a translated version of the data, so that they're not each individually having to figure out their own way to get the data.
And Echo's agreed. So Echo is in line and agrees with this. So they have their solution, and should we do nothing, they have a solution that they hope to come out with. That same resting API will interface with this broker center stack channel and allow not only the communication with all the current BMS vendors, but it gives one centralized standard to program to. If you're Salesforce, if you're new company X, new company Y, you can program into it. So they're the same message. you'll see them, they've committed into this feasibility study.
So if I could just add quickly, one of the challenges with Guidewire per se is still the broker adoption of the solution. So even although the companies are building, we need to make sure the brokers will come. And the only way to ensure brokers will come if there's mass take-up in the marketplace. Because as I was saying earlier on, if there's only one or two companies that can offer you real time, it's not going to change the business model of the broker when they're servicing consumer drastically. And we have to get to that tipping point. So we totally embrace what Guidewire are doing, what the guys are doing. We totally embrace what IBAC's trying to do. We totally embrace what TIC is going to do. This is really a speed of adoption and trying to get the mass market to take on this type of connectivity to make sure it does make a real difference for the consumer.
Because the average size broker that makes up our membership with the IBAO cannot afford to create an internal solution themselves that's ready to handle even the Guidewire APIs. It's not a cheap process, and this getting critical mass and then providing it to our membership and really pushing for broker adoption, it should become, if this works out, it should become table stakes just like eDocs are today. And it took some brokers in Ontario a long time to adopt eDocs, but try taking it away from them now, and their workflows would be a complete mess. So we see this as the next eDocs, and with the Guidewire, it takes a lot of time to get onto Guidewire. So even just because they've made this $125 million investment in Guidewire doesn't mean that all of a sudden Q2 of this year everything's going to be on Guidewire. We're watching Aviva move to Guidewire, and they're doing it in stages with their direct arm in RBC, and then their $4 billion in broker business. So it's going to take time. Even Commonwealth Mutual is now a Guidewire partner, and they've told us we're probably 18 months out before we can expect really anything on the Guidewire platform with them. So
one thing you guys talked about size and the big brokers and the small brokers not being able to afford it. This, in the worst iteration, if none of this launches and you can't get alignment in the industry, this could turn into a story of the haves and the have-nots. See, the brokers that are big enough to afford programming their own interface into these solutions will be able to do it. The small ones won't. And the same story with the smaller insurance companies. If they may not have the development dollars to build into this. So if we take a moment to keep the choice together, both in markets and brokers, and align on this, everybody can have a solution and we can move on to the next step.
Okay, so I got halfway through this slide. I'll jump back to, I did mass volume and time. So the next is the easy carrier participation. So it needs to be for all comers, like we keep saying. It needs to be for all the carriers, and we need to make it easy. So this solution that we're proposing, the carriers can use existing APIs. We're not asking them to reinvent the wheel. If they have existing APIs, the hub is going to be able to work with what they've got right now. And Colin, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that anymore, or if that's just...
Yeah, I mean, we're very cognizant that we have to promote CSO XML standards. And obviously, if everybody goes on to one set of standards, then the better it is. But even within the CSO XML standards, there's multiple different versions of, and every company's at a different state. So if we wait, and we know from talking to the companies over the last 12 months, if we wait for everybody to land on the same spot, it's not going to be in my lifetime. Because everybody's moving at different paces. Companies are telling us, and I'll pick on Commonwealth, for example, they've just chosen that they're going to move on to Guidewire solution. And it's going to take them 2 years just to get the thing up and going, let alone how long it's going to take to finish. They're not going to invest a ton of money on data standards to connect to a hub while they're changing the back-end systems. So we have to come up with a solution where everybody can connect today. We know that Intact, for example, has told us that they are not going to rebuild their data standards just to communicate with somebody else, because there's no investment return for them in order to do so. But they will give us access to their APIs. So we know that in order to get the big players, the small players to engage, we have to figure out how to translate that data centrally and not rely on them to do it for us, because it's never going to happen.
Yeah, and those two vendors that or those two carriers that Colin just mentioned, I know with Commonwealth, because we're a Commonwealth broker, that the investment for a mutual, the investment was the largest single investment that company's made in the history of the company. So like Colin said, they're not going to be making that investment and then at the same time be trying over the next 2 to 3 years of changing their current language so that it can work with what's available now. And with Intact, they've invested a ton of money into what they've got, and they've rolled it out in Quebec, and they're rolling out some of it in Ontario and opening up some APIs for brokers, but they're not going to change what they've just invested the last couple of years of money into trying to create the open APIs and the APIs that are being used in their client self-serve portal as well as the app.
We're going to have to pick up the pace if we want to
Okay.
save time
All
for
right.
questions.
I think that's music to everyone's ears. Okay, so then we'll make this short. Standard vendor integration. Well, regardless of what tech product the broker chooses, there's going to be a standard language in the hub. So how it will work, we've kind of touched on this, but the carrier will develop the API and make it available for everyone for consumption. It will be translated into the intermediary service, and the intermediary service will make it available to the BMSs, who will then be able to call this information once it's been transformed into a standardized format. That's we'll just cut that slide short because that's pretty simple. Okay, so the CSIO XML, like we said, we think this is a great language to be used for the for APIs, so that we think it'll be the easiest way for the hub to operate using this language that's already readily available, and a lot of people are already using it. But like we said, that doesn't eliminate the companies out there that are not currently using the CSIO XML. So if you're like many of the carriers, you can still participate in this model without having the XML.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges that we've heard is, well, will this not prevent companies moving on to the CSIO XML? But if you can think about it, if there is a standard language, CSIO XML, that people can easily translate, it'll just become that much easier and probably cheaper to use the translation service if you do move to that standard. So we think that this type of solution will encourage more people to move to CSIO XML more quickly than they ordinarily would do.
So the benefits for carriers, it's going to be quicker time to market. So they don't have to, like we said, wait till they're on a Guidewire or a Duck Creek platform. They can do it now. Lower resources needing, because we can use their existing APIs with very little change, and it removes some of the custom work and testing. For the tech vendors, they add they'll add much needed functionality to our BMSs and other tech third party support. Reduction in development and maintenance efforts. One API will integrate with all the carriers, and access to additional data quickly. So once again, quicker time to market there. And brokers, quicker time to market once again. That's the common thread with all four. It's participation of the mass, which we already spoke about, stopping multiple workflows within the brokerage. If we can get critical mass, it's going to be one workflow for the brokerage. And for the industry as a whole, once again, quicker time to market and a true consistent digital delivery system, which the customers are demanding and are going to continue to demand, and it's going to become table stakes that we have this. So we can't wait 2-3 years to be able to offer a true digital experience to our end user.
Greg, I think the one square that got missed in there is the consumer. The clear benefit to the consumer is we're delivering a much better product with more information, more data, and something that we can actually engage and provide useful tool for the consumer. There's clear benefits for them too.
Exactly, and for brokerages that operate with a multifaceted approach, where you have your traditional brokerage model, you can still operate with that, as well as having your digital offering for the clients who prefer to operate that way, or a hybrid model for clients that sometimes want to come in and visit you, and sometimes they don't want to see it all and they just want to handle it themselves. So IBAO Tech Committee ran a survey back in third or fourth quarter of 2017, and essentially, just to make this slide cut really short, it's very clear that there is a need. Brokers really want to have this. The companies are very intrigued at the possibility of a hub, and the IBAO, through the results of the survey, has said that this is the ideal roadmap for how we get there. So if you take a look here on this, the total carriers that have been involved in discussions with our tech committee represent almost 53% of the overall market share in the country. So we have a few that are already offering their external APIs and they're ready to go. We have others that are using APIs internally, have APIs working for some of their functionality and not for others. And then we have a lot of companies that are still operating on their old platforms, their legacy systems. Even if they have contracted to move over to a Guidewire or a Duck Creek, it's like we said, it's still going to take some time. So you'll see that they still will be operating, especially their underwriting. If they're moving claims over first, they're going to operate their underwriting for the short term on their older legacy system. So you'll even see that, Chris, with Echo. It's going to take them some time. So I think their legacy system's called Energy. They're going to be operating still with Energy for the foreseeable future as they're moving everything over. But we think that it can be easy to, or not easy. It can be possible to move from one stage to the other here, but it's time consuming, and we just at this point don't feel like we have the time to wait. So these are the broker survey findings after the survey was done. That essentially, to break this down, 90% of brokers want to work entirely from their BMS. 85% of brokers feel the ability to perform policy changes is going to become table stakes, right in their BMS, sorry. And 90% of broker clients would like access to, at least at a bare minimum, their online payment schedule and ability to make payment type changes. So this is a busy slide, but we'll just kind of break it down. In the far left, you can see the purple bar is showing what companies are already offering. So 13 of the 15 carriers that we've spoken with already have the ability to do auto rating, and they have the APIs ready for that. But if you go over to the far right, that's where you start to see less of the vendors ready today, and that's more on the property side and more of the labor intensive transactional type data transfer. So I mean, it's moving, and there are people ready, but there's also those same companies that have a lot on the left side are lacking on the right side, and once again, that's going to be a time lag.
Yeah, so go back to the Guidewire project where there's a handful of companies that we know are going to offer their APIs externally to engage with broker BMSs. Out of the 15 companies we spoke to, we know 13 have APIs, either internal or external, that they could expose if they chose to. So even by just looking at a different approach to the marketplace, we can see that we can engage with much more of the volume in the marketplace coming through these companies than you could if we waited for a Duck Creek, a Guidewire project to come online. So that's what the message of this slide is, really.
Yeah, and then just before I hand it over to Adam, so we know what we have now. So this gives us a bit of a snapshot based on 53% of the market share in Canada. We know kind of what we have now. We know based on surveys and talking to broker focus groups where we want to be. So now it's just a matter of finding the low-hanging fruit and the path of least resistance on how we can get there. And that's what I'll hand it over to Adam now to elaborate.
I have a question before you step away. So the complexity slide that you showed earlier, showing all the connections between carriers and vendors, et cetera, that complexity is currently being managed by engineers at the carriers, engineers at the vendors. The way I'm looking at this, what you're suggesting is taking all the complexity and moving it into the hub, just one central location. The question I have is, how do you anticipate managing that complexity? We know there'll be regulatory changes. It always happens with Ontario Auto. There'll be changes at the carrier level. They'll want a new element. How are you going to manage all of that? How are you going to keep up with the changes that are inevitable?
So I'll take the first stab at it and then grill me when I don't answer it. This current plate, even though it looks messy and complex, it's still not actually delivering what any of us want. We're not getting the real-time data. We're not getting the speed of transaction. We're not getting to do business the way we want to do business. So this is broken and continuing further down this path. The second thing this shows is newcomers and innovators, that bottom 4 or 5 blank blue blobs. It's a giant barrier to entry because they need to come in, make a relationship, and somehow figure out the code of these very poorly documented systems, and some that there was never an instructional written on how to do business with us. So by everybody moving to a centralized hub and one standardized place, newcomers can come in, new technology can break in, and as new regulation comes out, there's only one hub to update. There's only one set that needs to go on.
I think the other part of it is that we're moving. Adam's part of the presentation is to talk about a feasibility study, and part of the feasibility study is exactly that kind of thing: is how is it maintained? What's the cost to maintain it? We think we have an idea, but we really don't know for sure. So, if you want to hit that.
So we'll go into these slides and then we'll revisit the question.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think the complexity issue is something that really needs to be addressed, and I'm not sure you hit it right there. It is a complex. These are complex systems, and I just look from the software perspective. Software is great. It needs a lot of maintenance, and what's the bill going to be for that?
Yeah, and that's all we're at this point. What we've come up with over the last year to 18 months isn't that we want to build this hub. It's we want to run a feasibility study to answer all those questions that you have, and I'm sure a ton of other brokers would have, and insurance companies are going to have, and we sure know that tech or our BMSs are asking these questions. So that's the point of the feasibility study, and I'll transition that over to Adam right now to address that, and then we can open the floor for a bunch of questions.
Okay, so feasibility. Okay, so the proof of concept. So before we dive into this one, just for a show of hands in the room, hands up if you're on the broker side of this relationship. Okay, and then hands up if you're on the vendor or insurance company side. So it might be split half and half. And so this is where we get to the ask. What are all these points as we go through the piece? What we're asking and what we're about to do is that the carrier support the association in a feasibility study. IBAO is matching it. Colin can speak a little bit more to that, but we'll go in through what a proof of concept will look like. So the feasibility study, it's not to prove the technology works. We know the technology for APIs works and that it's here. It's trying to figure out what is the scope of it for this and what is going to be the order of rollout for the development for the wins. The idea of defining the corporate ownership or whether this runs as a not-for-profit or who has it, the big thing we're trying to avoid there is that there's going to be a guardian of the data. We don't want to create a CGI Mark II that costs everybody money, slows everything down, and has a different incentive. So we're all incentivized to be sharing this data back and forth as quickly and easily as possible so we can do business faster together. So we don't want to introduce another ownership piece.
As a guy that sat on CSIO for 6 years, I know where I want it to sit. It's commonly owned by brokers and carriers. Why wouldn't we put it there? Nobody gets to own it. Nobody gets to control it. It's owned by the industry. To me, that's the logical spot where it'll land.
And the other idea of the feasibility study is to identify the low-hanging fruit where we can see the wins, where we can find the gaps and start to cross these bridges together.
Just quickly on that one, we know the APIs that exist today. We know what the brokers want. What we don't know is what the capability of the vendors are to consume that data if it was presented to them. So part of the feasibility study is to look at the gaps between what's available and what they can actually produce for brokers and ultimately consumers.
Okay, so the key risks that we need to address in this feasibility study. Disruption, we know that some vendors and some carriers have already scoped and some have built and some are planning to build their own end-to-end solutions, and we need to have a very real and open conversation about that and manage that disruption. The speed and price, this has to be quick and it has to be affordable for all. The question of how it will be priced will come up often, but can't be a factor in the evaluation success of the proof of concept. So coming up with a proof of concept and a feasibility study shouldn't be stopped or held up by trying to predict what the end solution of pricing and holding and costing of this. the perception of industry-led solutions is some baggage that we have as an industry. We haven't always been the best on delivering these solutions, and there is that political piece of this that we're trying to get past to move on. The post-feasibility study of the ownership of this is another one, and everybody that's pushing for the feasibility study is trying to avoid a centralized ownership of the data. So if it could sit on CZO, or it's some ownership by both industry, brokers, and insurance partners, so that it's just there for the betterment of the industry, is the first desire. Industry inclination to monetize of integrations, so trying to avoid that. If you're running it as a not-for-profit, as an ideal, simple vision of the goal, it's to better all in the industry. Technical gatepost. So the authentication, authorization, audit requirements, and volume and load requirements. Working team discussions to be held to chart out the best path for all, agreeing the best approach for the proof of concept. The definition of the transactional audit requirements to be made at the commencement of the feasibility study. And the volume and load requirements baseline to be set out on what would constitute a successful feasibility study in terms of number of transactions, concurrency, etc. So we're asking for the industry's participation and permission to go into this feasibility study to see how this could best benefit us. Feasibility study transactions, automobile policy inquiry, property policy inquiry, billing schedule, small commercial policy, and property rating. These are all the first initial scopes of the APIs that are currently available, and how we can all work together in a smarter, smoother rotation.
Yeah, it might not be too obvious as to why that bottom one's there, but we know there's a handful of companies, and they're not small companies, that are working on automating the small commercial property rating right now. Some of them have already been out. And without actually interjecting in that process, we're going to end up with, yet again, multiple portals, multiple ways of doing things in the industry. So to go back to Kim's question, actually creating a centralized hub of translation totally simplifies any change that comes through the industry by having industry ownership of it, because then we know the industry will all follow for all the participants within that hub. If we leave it for each participant to do their own thing, we're going to end up with where we're actually heading with commercial property rating right now, which is everybody's going to produce their own versions of. So if there are any changes, then the changes for the industry become much more complex, more inefficient, and more expensive to implement.
Okay, so here's at the time of the production of the slide, the full commitments. Under the carrier side, Colin pointed out there's a number of other carriers that are pretty far along in discussions and pretty supportive, but haven't necessarily inked the support on it. From the very beginning, they wanted to state that the BMS companies and many of the third-party tech companies were fully in agreement and supportive of this initiative and the feasibility study, and many of the markets. And so the ask is that we get more of the market support, and the more we have and the more alignment we have at these early days of feasibility to make sure the feasibility is taking into account all of the opinions and needs of what needs to happen.
Oh, don't mind us, we're having a conversation.
Cool. Sidebar.
No, I was just going to say, hello? I was just going to say, Intact's not on there, but when Intact launched their client self-serve portal, and we've had many conversations with the tech committee and the IBAO board, and they are working very hard with us, and we're working very hard with them to try and learn from them, as well as figure out how we can avoid having to, like Colin said, have 10 different client self-serve portals for our clients. And Intact we've made a lot of progress with the team at Intact, and they've been great in trying to help us learn some of this stuff, as well as giving us a lot of insights on their analytics on what they've learned so far. So
yeah, one of the interesting thing about this slide is the carriers. You'll notice the ones that are most supportive of what we're doing are actually the guidewire companies. There's a realization in the marketplace today from the hundreds of millions of dollars these companies are spending on guidewire and connectivity is going to be pretty much for naught unless they can get the brokers to change their operating models to be able to service clients more digitally. The only way we can do that is through adoption. And they know, based on the path that they've taken, that unless we do something like this, I'm not saying this is the only answer, but unless we do something like this, then their investments are going to have pretty poor returns on them.
So these are the next steps, just talking about the association and the committees working with the providers and BMS vendors and industry partners to keep moving on the proof of concept. Daryl, do you recognize someone?
I saw him on doing some virtual reality this morning, I think.
It was. High fives. I want a high five. So now the questions.
Before we go there, I think there's just a couple of things we should clarify. Call it an accelerator, call it a translator, call it a hub, same thing. We haven't figured out what we're calling it yet. Industry's calling it different things. One of the big pushbacks we had was why do we need this? We should just be able to flow straight through. Well, it's really interesting because we all know that Guidewire's had an accelerator committee working for the last year and a half to build an accelerator. Duck Creek is forming their committee to build their accelerator or translator. We shouldn't wait for each of the BMSs to build their own translators when we can just do an industry hub that actually allows that innovation and ease of entry. So let's just build one and be done with it.
Yeah, I mean, the other aspect to make is as these companies invest $100 million in their Guidewire, we'll just pick on Guidewire again, they're going to get the return one way or another. And if we don't step up to the plate to help them to engage with the broker network, to change the broker network, they're all going to work around us. We know that. We've been approached by at least a handful of the big companies in the last 6 to 9 months to ask if we would build with them direct-to-consumer offerings for their company. Clearly the answer is no, because that's not the answer. But we're not going to stop them doing it unless we provide a better solution.
Questions? We've got another 10 minutes, I think.
Daryl?
You guys put this deck up on the IBAO website for the members?
Well, hopefully we're videoing it, so we will put the video up. Yes, we will.
You get to watch it all again, Daryl.
100%.
In the back corner.
So I come from the tech side, from the life and health, so opposite side of the industry, but the exact same problem. So I really commend for what you guys are doing, and I agree there needs to be a centralized industry solution here. Knowing what it takes fiscally to build this type of software, as you mentioned, hundreds plus millions of dollars, not just to build, but to upkeep, maintain, who's going to foot the bill? And obviously this isn't charity, somebody's going to be footing the bill for it. And then how is the industry going to back monetize from the value of this? I think it's one thing to think about this. The pilot, from what it sounds like, will still take a year to develop, if not more. It will put us at least 2 to 3 years behind Guidewires of the like. So if we think about a timeline, 3, 5, 10, who's going to foot the running costs?
Well, I was just going to say we really do want to walk before we run here. We want to get this feasibility study done, which is not a huge cost. The feasibility study and the IBAO will have a bit of skin in the game, but there's a lot of supporters from the previous slide there. You can see there's been a lot of supporters from the BMS vendors to the carriers as well as brokers that want to support and see if this is even possible, because part of the feasibility study is coming up with that is what is this going to cost? Is this going to be something worthwhile? Are we too late? And we don't think we are, but we think if we wait much longer, we will be. And you're right, Guidewire's got a head start, but just because Guidewire is developing a solution doesn't mean that that's going to actually be the best outcome for the brokers with multiple markets and multiple systems, some on Duck Creek, some on Guidewire, some on their legacy systems.
So our assumption in this whole thing is that if we don't build it or somebody builds it centrally, then it'll be built, spread out across the whole industry. And that fragmented approach is going to cost way more for the industry, and it'll eventually end up getting paid for by consumers than it will do if we actually try and get a focused force to actually decide whether we can do this. We know there's probably about half a dozen vendors today that can do it. So
That can build it.
That can build it. And that already exists. It exists in the States. It exists here in different forms. So it's really just a case of getting the next stage, if we can all agree on how to do this. The next stage would be then, how do we get somebody to do it for a cost that is going to benefit everybody? And throughout this whole thing, we may hit barriers, we don't know. But we have to try something, because we know the path we're going down today without this is not the way to go.
There was another question over there.
Yeah, just so you know, we're all used to dealing with portals right now, and they can go down, and it's very frustrating, but you can still conduct your business. What happens if the hub goes down, for example?
What happens when CSIO goes down? It happens. It's not that often, and honestly, when was the last time CSIO went down?
It'd be the same as the portal going down. Like, you'd have your static data that was in your database that would be there, and you would transact it the same way as if you couldn't refresh any new data. No different scenario.
Right beside you.
Can you comment on the current state of the SCIO XML standard with respect to personal and commercial lines?
CSIO cities.
In what sense?
So the quick answer, no, because I don't sit on the CSIO board, so you need to ask CSIO that one. So, but we can find that answer out and distribute it for sure.
Any questions over this end of the room? Hey, Ed.
Well, just regarding, because I mean, there's been other vendors that, of course, tried to do something like this, such as Iterate. And so from the lessons learned there, or the reasons that it either worked or didn't work, or how is this different?
Yeah, so we know, so let's put down the ones that have tried and failed. We know today that Guidewire is succeeding. So let's flip it the other way. How can we learn from the individuals that have got this working to expand it across the marketplace? That's the real crux of this. We know the technology works, so keep away from the tech vendors is really just around, do we wish to collaborate? Can we collaborate? And is there benefit in us all collaborating? That's what we're really trying to look at.
And the timing for the API technology is pretty current now that as many more vendors and many more carriers and third-party technology companies are exposing APIs, so you can start to decide who works with what.
Yeah, the technology available today didn't exist the way it did. It did in the
Even
in
5
the
years ago.
systems that failed. Yeah. Anybody down here? No. We'll go back down to this end. Yes.
So are you trying to beat Guidewire to help?
Absolutely not. It's encouraging, and they are encouraging us to share in their knowledge to try and get everybody else to speed up so they can keep pace. Okay? So they are the leaders right now. We know they are, but we need to keep pace, so we're not going to get critical mass. Without the critical mass, the broker network's not going to shift.
And they're not a solution for all, right? They're neither a solution for all third parties coming in or all the companies that didn't or haven't yet chose or launched Guidewire.
Nor are we trying to shut down other industry projects. There's the TIC claims project. There's the IBAC data exchange. There's the CSIO eSlip project. It's all out there today. There's projects that are available, and I don't think in your brokerage you're looking at any one single solution. Let's see what's out there. We think if this works, it'll actually facilitate all of those other projects to make them that much better. All right. So I think our takeaways from this are the brokers want to control the relationship. The brokers want to continue to develop our business, to service customers the way that they want to be serviced. And if we can deliver on this project, it'll allow not just the brokers, but the carriers, the broker channel to thrive, to continue to grow, to expand. Clearly, we're not good at what we do today to serve consumers with new technology. They're getting used to seeing new technologies in their lives, and we're not keeping up. So we need to do something different. We need to streamline it, and we need to allow innovation to get into our industry. So I think our takeaways today are brokers, if you like the idea, talk to your companies, encourage them to support it. And companies, if you'd like more information, talk to Colin, reach out to the IBAO. And it's, we'll keep you updated as we keep going on this. We think it's an exciting project that could really do it for our future. Thanks for coming.